So, Frederick Thorpe takes us through the special audit process that was in place that he describes in his statement that the post office used if they suspected something was going wrong. However, when questioned about the interviews and these being arranged prior to the audit visit, he seems to suggest that they'd already made up their mind that a criminal prosecution was going to be made, and in each case, and that there was never a case where that a special audit didn't result in criminal proceedings being brought, presumably making it sound like a special audit was more a fact-finding visit to support a conclusion that had already been made. Let's jump into the inquiry.
So just want to take one step back to the audit process and before going into the investigation process in a little bit more detail. Could we please have page 6 of Mr. Thorpe's witness statement on screen? It's WITN 10410100. And page 6, please. And down to paragraph 19. So you explain at paragraph 19 that where the pattern of irregularities suggested deliberate action rather than error, then the district audit manager would be contacted and a special audit of the accounts of the post office under suspicion requested. So is this a description of what would happen before a special audit?
Well, it depends. One of the most common problems we had was with pension allowances. And what would happen is that the paid order unit, Lisahali, up in Londonderry, would take an office, check all the pension allowances. If they found any discrepancies, they would report that back to us after a period of time. We would then intercept the pouches from the office locally, have them checked locally, and a schedule would be produced from the results of the checks. When it was decided that the evidence was such that it was probably deliberate action rather than error, then we would ask for a special order to be committed, and then we would attend the office on the day of the audit.
And who then decided that the evidence was such that it suggested that there was deliberate action as opposed to error?
Well, ultimately it would have been myself.
And so in what circumstances would you consider the evidence would suggest that there was deliberate action rather than just error on the part of a sub-postmaster or postmistress?
Well, with the regularity of the pension overclaims, you see, we're going back sort of almost pre-Horizon, when people still had paid pension books and you had to tear a foil out. The sub-postmaster retained the foil and paid the person the appropriate amount. And these pension allowance foils were accumulated in the office, ad listed, and a figure put into the cash account. Now, if there were, once they started being checked, if they were regularly missing, then you would check the office account. And if there wasn't a corresponding surplus, the question is why. And sometimes there were large amounts, sometimes there were only small amounts, which would possibly be a keying error. And once we'd established that, we would then call an audit. If, after doing the checks, there wasn't a pattern developing, then we would perhaps pass it back to the retail network manager as a training issue, or just to speak to the sub-postmaster and say.
And so
if there were regular shortfalls, it was deliberate. Obviously, we're kind of missing the point that it could be a system error, which doesn't seem to have occurred to absolutely anybody at the post office or Fujitsu, if we're being kind, or was just completely discounted because it doesn't suit the narrative.
a few lines down then on paragraph 19, you explain that on initial entry at the office, the investigation manager would introduce themselves and explain why the audit had been arranged. did you or Miss Winter attend a special audit as a matter of course?
Yes. Special audits we would, yes.
And you also explained that the investigator would explain that following the audit, the sub-postmaster or staff from a directly managed branch office would be invited to attend a formal interview under caution.
Yes.
Were they invited to that interview before the audit had actually taken place?
Yes, we would have done. The reason being that we had a potential problem, which the schedule demonstrated, and so we would need to speak to the sub-postmaster in the first instance, because we didn't know how they ran their office. Did they run it hands-on? Did they run it from a distance? You know, were staff involved? So we weren't, at that level, we weren't sure who would be involved. So we would speak to the sub-postmaster in the first instance. We would explain that we would be conducting the interview under caution. And we would further explain their legal rights, and that if they wanted to make arrangements to have a solicitor present or make arrangements to interview in the solicitor's office or whatever, they could do that once the audit was completed. And we would also mention the friend option and say if you want to invite. Often it was a union representative for branch office staff or Federation of Sub-postmasters for sub-postmasters. But we were fairly lenient on who we allowed as a friend, just in the just so as not to overwhelm the person being interviewed.
Was it ever the case, though, that a special audit revealed that there was actually no problem with the branch and that the accounts had been balanced?
It could do. I can't think of a particular instance where it did.
Wow. I mean, giving them notice for an interview is fair enough, and, you know, being lenient, allowing them to have someone with them so that they don't feel as much pressure. I mean, I'm sure when you're being interviewed under caution, accused of terrible things, that it probably doesn't matter who's in the room with you, that you feel under a significant amount of pressure in any case. But not being able to recall a single special audit that resulted in actually there not being an issue. I mean, they did say they collected some evidence prior, which suggested there was an issue, but saying they kept an open mind as to whether it was an error, could be a keying error if it was a small amount. But then almost seemed to be suggesting, well, it was never the case actually where we thought they were innocent, so we might as well get everything done, dusted, sealed, and explain that they're going to have an interview because we already really have formed the opinion that they've actually done the thing we are accusing them of. It's almost like the conclusion has been formed, and it sounds like then evidence is being sought to justify that conclusion, rather than an unbiased investigation, which is aiming to determine what happened. And by his own admission there, at the point where they are conducting these interviews, they're saying that it's not even necessarily sure who the suspect or the alleged person who's done this is. So how do they even know they're interviewing the right person? It would follow that they would interview the sub-postmaster in any case. But how many cases have we heard of where actually in the end it's been somebody else who's had a case brought against them? It always seems to have been the sub-postmaster, even if we cast our mind back to people like Elaine Cotham's testimony, where she seems to be suggesting it was the husband, yet they still took the sub-postmaster to trial for the alleged theft. And as we know from previous cases, if you can't identify both that a crime has taken place and that you have accused the right person of it, then the case fails basic prosecution tests to bring the case.
It could do, in which case we say, okay, there's no problem here, just a careless sub-postmaster, and then we speak to the retail network manager and arrange to have error notices issued to collect the monies due or repay the monies due from the overstating of the pension allowance that we'd found.
And in those situations, then a formal interview under caution wouldn't be necessary, is that right?
We probably would still do that. Maybe seem a bit heavy-handed, but as I say, until we spoke to the sub-postmaster, we didn't know exactly how the office was managed and how many staff they had. Was the one-man band, as I say, whether he managed the office.
So wait, you suspect that something's wrong. You do a special audit that shows there's nothing gone wrong, although we can't recall that ever happening, which is a little bit concerning. But let's follow this theoretical case where the special audit doesn't actually find anything wrong. You are still going to interview them under caution just to find out who works at the post office. Surely in the course of doing this audit, A, you see the people working there, or B, you can ask them a question. Why it is necessary to do that under caution in this theoretical case, which no doubt would add stress to the sub-postmasters unnecessarily, is mind-boggling. You simply just need to ask the question of who works there, which you would presume they may have a good awareness of. I mean, he says this also applies, when we looked at the evidence there, this special audit process also applies to directly managed offices. Well, surely they know who works there. They are employing them.
From afar or what?
So does it follow from that, that before a special audit had taken place, it had already been decided that a criminal investigation of some description would follow the audit?
Yes, we would speak with the retail network manager, explain what evidence we had, and we would then report back to the retail network manager following the audit. And it could be, say, look, it's not the sub-postmaster, there's no evidence to show that he's involved in this in any way, in which case the retail network manager would take, there's no action to take other than arrange for the error notices to be raised, or it could point to the member of staff, in which case, they would need to be interviewed as well.